Good morning. Welcome to the LGA's webinar. This is one of a series that we've got on this week and last week. So I hope you'll enjoy what you hear and be able to interact. I'm Councillor Marianne Overton, leader of the LGA's independent group. And before we hear from Tanni, I'd like to mention a couple of housekeeping points. This webinar is recorded. And if you'd like to ask a question, use the Q&A, and also if you'd like to push one of your favourite questions up the list, you can use the upvote system so that you can get that to be asked first. I'd like to thank our sponsors, the CCLA, for their support in helping us get this series of webinars on stream. And I'm going to turn now to a very warm welcome to Tanni Grey-Thompson to our virtual conference. Tanni is one of our most successful para-Olympians and also a crossbench peer and a vice president of the local government association. She'll be talking to us about an inclusive recovery in the context of the coronavirus, and including public transport and important activities and services such as leisure, gym, sport, all of those things that we councils are trying to work out how to keep functioning well and popular in the long term. So without further ado, over to you, Tanni.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everybody. It's a great pleasure to be here. It's amazing how quickly our lives, for many of us, seem to have moved online. So I'm going to share a presentation with you, and hopefully that you'll be able to see it. It's just some slides which are going to cover some of the things that I'm going to be talking about at the moment. As a crossbench peer, I never thought we'd ever actually be working from home, and the things that I work on, which is disability rights, physical activity and public transport, have just had layers of complexity added by the coronavirus and the legislation that I'm working on around that. So at the moment I'm working on a lot of things like health and social care and easements, and just trying to help people who are struggling in really sort of difficult times. There is no doubt that the coronavirus has had a devastating impact on society. And it's highlighted the needs that we've got to think differently about how we meet the needs of a changed and changing society. We need to start prioritising the things that we value most, and my personal belief that health, well-being and happiness is a really important part of that. The lockdown has highlighted just how significant physical activity can be for our health and well-being, and it's now evident that the physical activity sector provides an essential public service. Maintaining our physical health and mental health will become even more important as we recover from the coronavirus crisis, not just for individuals, but also to support our already overstretched health service. With obesity, the second largest cause of hospitalisation from the virus, gyms and leisure centres are equipped not only to combat COVID-19, but really importantly to support the rehabilitation of those who are recovering from the virus. And with each week, we're learning more and more about the long-term impact of COVID-19. And just how detailed some of that rehabilitation will need to be. Finally, there's a recognition, I think at least at an individual level, of the value of the health and physical activity sector and the service that it provides. And this really needs to be leveraged and maintained by government as we come out of the crisis, as there is already evidence that people are finding it more challenging to stay active now that lockdown restrictions have eased. The Prime Minister's intention to lead a new public health initiative is a really welcome step in the right direction. And we know that we need to do more to support people's mental and physical health going forward. COVID-19 was a wake-up call for many, and nobody has ever dealt with anything quite like this before. The complexity of decision makings must be recognised. But the collective physical and mental health became a national priority almost overnight. It's been amazing as I've sort of being out of my house for the hour a day is seeing, you know, people walking, running, people on bikes and doing things in a different way. And it's been quite exciting to see the people who didn't previously exercise now thinking about what they do. But actually how we maintain this focus as we come out of the crisis will be hugely important, and how we encourage people to stay active is you know, a big task for us all. So this is why there is an urgent need for people, institutions and governments to rethink what we mean by health and well-being. We have to move away from reactive healthcare to think about preventative healthcare approach. And that needs to be a bottom-up approach, supporting people to take control of their health at a local level so that healthy people can stay healthy and we ease the burden on the NHS. And we need to encourage healthy behaviours as early as possible to produce those lifelong habits, and to rethink prevention that includes everyone from the oldest to the youngest, or the youngest to the oldest. What's really important as part of this is there is no need to reinvent the wheel. We can use the spaces, facilities, professionals and services that are already available to us to improve public health and well-being. For example, using school sports facilities to engage children in affordable and healthy activities over the summer holidays to tackle childhood obesity and to combat antisocial behaviour. Utilising underused space and resources across leisure facilities to provide free or subsidised activity sessions targeted at inactive people, from children to older adults. And the physical activity sector is well equipped to support this process, and we'd love to want to work with the LGA to activate this and to help and support the work that's in this area. The physical activity sector and its workforce provide huge value to our national health and economy, and more must be done to leverage its potential as we recover from the COVID-19 crisis. The sector's facilities and providers are on the front line of the prevention agenda, contributing to the prevention of 20 chronic health conditions such as cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes and cancer, and supporting the overall mental well-being of the population. During lockdown, 66% of adults in England said they recognise the importance of physical activity for their mental health and resilience. And you see from the slide, it contributes 7.7 billion to the economy annually, and also generates 3.3 billion in social value on account of improved health, reduced crime and increased educational attainment. The physical activity sector operates across 7,000 sites in the UK and engages over 15% of the UK population through its membership base. And we know the physical activity is equipped to play a greater role in supporting our collective health and resilience, as well as the national economy. But government across all levels need to give greater consideration to the ways in which the sector's potential can be leveraged going forward. I'm now going to outline 3 opportunities for us where we could work together to leverage the physical activity sector at the local level to support the health and well-being of our communities. The first opportunity at the local level is to rethink public leisure facilities so we can leverage the role they play in supporting the health and well-being of the population. The nation's public leisure facilities form a core part of local infrastructure. It's spaces to connect with and meet new people, spaces to be active and learn healthy behaviours, spaces for children to play and take swimming lessons, spaces that support older people or people with long-term conditions through activity prescriptions. Public facilities support health of our most vulnerable communities, which is so important in the context of deteriorating health and increased health inequalities. BAME groups make up 1 in 4 of all public leisure members versus 14% of the population. 8% of public leisure members reside in the UK's most deprived areas, and 2 in 3 swimmers use public leisure facilities for swimming. We can work in partnership to rethink how we use these facilities to support our communities. But before we do, we need to work collectively to ensure we can create a foundation for their survival. 48% of the public leisure facilities could disappear by Christmas if no support is provided. UK Active and Community Leisure UK warned all MPs that local leisure providers and councils need more support to ensure these facilities can survive. And the loss of these facilities would result in 2.8 billion loss in social value every year. The UK Active team took government officials to various gyms and leisure facilities last week to show them how the sector is preparing for reopening. Officials were taken to Kensington Leisure Centre, which stepped up to support communities in the aftermath of Grenfell. And we need to work together to show government how valuable local action and facilities can be for our communities. We should begin conversations with LGA, UK Active, Simpsonburn and Community Leisure UK to lobby government and ensure we get the support we need to keep these facilities alive and support our communities. The second opportunity at the local level is to work together to leverage the physical activity sector's potential to support high street renewal and community health. We're currently experiencing two simultaneous crises which have been exacerbated by COVID-19 and their harm in the health, well-being and economic prosperity of our communities. The first crisis is the high street, which has experienced widespread decline in the last few years. In 2019, there were 7,500 additional empty retail spaces. 5 out of 34 retailers had negative cash flow going into the COVID-19 crisis, and we don't know how many will survive the COVID-19 crisis as we come out. Decline in footfall due to changing customer and consumer behaviour and online shopping has had a big impact. Yet the physical activity sector was one of 2 sectors with growing numbers of outlets on the high street in 2019. The second crisis is the public health crisis, which has extensively been touched on already. But it's worth mentioning just a few more statistics. 1 in 4 adults in England are obese. 11 million adults in England are physically inactive, increasing their likelihood of contracting long-term conditions later in life. Loneliness and mental health issues are also on the rise. Physical activity and the sector that delivers it can support all of these issues. A decline in high streets are detrimental to the economic, social and public health of our communities. High streets with high retail vacancy rates also score below average on public health indicators for conditions which can be managed or prevented with physical activity. Despite positive effects of physical activity, businesses for all our communities, they still struggle to obtain access to empty retail space due to the challenges in change of use applications. So it's positive to hear the government was moving towards implementing more flexibility in current planning regulations. But again, we need more dialogue between local councils, planning teams and physical activity businesses so we can work together to improve the economic and health outcomes on the high street. The last opportunity at the local level is to use school facilities to engage children and young people in meaningful activities to improve educational attainment and boost self-confidence and increase social cohesion. And I've got a quote up there from John McAvoy, Nike ambassador and Ironman athlete. John's an amazing young man, and what he says is we need to show young people that anything is possible, that with the right mentors and by giving them access to safe community spaces, we can help them make real positive change. What's amazing about John's story is John is a former high-profile armed robber who turned his life around through sport. He spent 10 years in prison. If you haven't heard his story, he's got some amazing things online and talking about how he ended up in prison. He tells us an incredible story about how at 16 he bought his first sawn-off shotgun because he thought that's what young people did. Anyway, during his time in jail, he began exercising, and that's what helped him turn his life around. And he became a professional athlete. He continued training when he was released from prison, and he's now the only Nike-sponsored Ironman athlete in the world. He's been a huge advocate for how physical activity can support children and young people, especially considering today's children are the least active generation ever. Some more statistics: 1 in 10 children did no physical activity during lockdown. When we layer on the other things we know about, there's approximately 2 million children who haven't had access to any education during this time. It's a real challenge how we don't lose a generation of young people. Work that we'd previously done showed that children before the pandemic lost up to 75% of their fitness levels over the 6-week summer holiday. The idea that children are out playing from dawn to dusk is a complete misnomer. I'm not sure that it ever quite existed in the way that we sometimes seem to remember. But with levels declining faster in children from lower income families, imagine what's going to happen when children, when they do go back to school in September. There will be a huge number of children who will have gone 23 weeks without access to education, physical activity, physical literacy, play, all those things that are really important at teaching them really good skills that will carry through for later life. So there is an opportunity to start from scratch and rethink how we can engage children and young people in more opportunities for physical activity. And I believe, the best place to start is in schools. I mean, I know schools have a lot of pressure and, we expect them to do a lot of things. But 39% of sports facilities in England sit behind the school gates. And somebody who comes from a sports background, when I first found out these statistics, I was really shocked. And, I've worked in sport and activity in this space for a really long time, but it's 39% behind school gates. And the reality is the majority, for many reasons, are inaccessible outside of school hours. So with minimal investment, these sports grounds and facilities could be converted into ready-to-use community hubs to engage children and their facilities. And thinking about affordable is a really important word right now, and healthy activities. This model, which has been pioneered by UK Active, promises to reduce the burden on local authorities using support of the physical activity sector, and has the power to engage hard to reach children and young people, the very children that we need to be helping through this time. And there's a huge opportunity to unlock school grounds and leverage the children's activity sector reach at the local level to ensure all children have access to healthy and meaningful activities. So our plans for opening schools this summer have changed slightly because of where we are, but this is something that we really, really want to drive forward. And just a brief story, I went to visit one of the schools that we supported last year, and it was amazing, seeing children, the programs we were running, the children were fed, and they had access to physical activity, and it just gave them a chance to do things differently. Parents are hard pressed, and even more so. It's a bit of a misnomer when we're talking about people working from home. I tend to think of it about we're all living at work. And in the future, there's even more challenges we have to try and combat to help parents to get through this. So, as outlined here today, there are various opportunities for us to work together, and I'd love to continue the conversation. And ways that we can leverage the physical activities potential to support the recovery from COVID-19 and support public health at the local level. So these do involve rethinking public leisure to support community health, leveraging the sector for high street renewal and improved health, and using existing assets to support the health and well-being of children and young people. We will continue to explore the role of physical activity in a changed society during our National Summit 2020, which is our flagship policy event. It's now taking place online across various sessions from the 2nd of November to the 27th of November. And the event will be accompanied by a consultation and explore the government's vision for physical activity, the role of wellbeing and physical activity in policy and practice, and building physical activity into public spaces and empowering the population through physical activity. We're under no illusions about the challenges that we face going forward. There are many of them. We're under no illusions about the challenges that local authorities are facing at the moment in terms of making really, really difficult decisions. And I don't envy anyone having to make decisions in this time. But amongst all that, I'm sort of quite an optimistic person, and sort of with a good sense of realism thrown in. But I think there is an opportunity to change. And the final thing I'm going to say is, if the House of Lords can go online, which is words I never thought I would ever say in a million years, in an institution where if you ask why we do something, the response is, well, we've done it like that for 463 years, do you want us to change? It has shown in the last few weeks that change is possible. But to enact change, we need to work together, we need to think differently, and we need to be ambitious. We need to work within our means, but also we need to be pushing government hard to think about how it can support local government in different ways. So that's it for my formal presentation. Thank you very much for listening to that. And I'm very happy to answer any questions that you have.
That's excellent. Thank you very much indeed, Tanni. Brilliant. It's now our opportunity to hear questions. And so if you're there, please put some questions in. We're looking forward to answering those, and using the upvote as well, if you'd like to encourage a question to come near the top. I'm going to start with two questions, if that's okay, Tanni. Firstly, have you got some good examples of equality and inclusion that have gone on during this COVID-19, and that are maybe lessons for post-lockdown as well? A couple of examples of good things that have been going on and that we can use for the future. And then the second one is, I don't know if we know how people's attitudes have changed to sport during the COVID crisis. You did talk about seeing people exercising that hadn't done so before, which I think is a good point. But are there some ways that, is there any evidence for that? And are there some ways we should be adapting our leisure services to, as a result, rather than straightforward returning to normal? Is there anything we should be doing differently, lessons that we've learned? Thank you.
Thank you. First question, good examples. There have been, at a sort of an individual level, people have been in touch with me and told me things that they're doing in a very different way to be active. There's been, lots of providers of doing online courses and doing one-to-one and offering advice in different ways. We've heard some amazing examples of people who work in the industry have been, diverting their work in terms of shopping and helping people because they know the people who come through the doors of their centres and know people who have a vulnerability. So we've heard some lovely things where gym instructors have been going doing in people shopping and things like that. So outside what you would probably normally expect somebody to do. So some of that collaboration has been lovely. People have been in touch with me to tell me about how they've been exercising differently in their group. So maybe someone they might go to yoga with, they've been doing some of that stuff online. There is a load of online information there, and sometimes it may feel hard to kind of pick your way through it, but the positivity that's come through has been amazing. In terms of change in behaviour, again, there's quite a lot of research coming through about how in this time there are people doing more exercise than they normally would, about how some women have found it, they've enjoyed, they've found it more challenging to exercise out on the street in terms of how they feel they're perceived, and how they maybe sort of feel judged. But then lots of women are saying they feel they have a freedom and more time to do things differently. There's some research that I was reading from Wales last night, which is saying, people are missing, and men are missing being in the gym. The challenge is that people don't have the same, because so older people have been buying lots of equipment. They don't have that sort of industry standard equipment at home to do things in a different way. So they are missing the social side and the equipment and everything else that comes with it. A huge number of people have said that they, are really looking forward to being able to go back into that environment. And there's been some stories in the papers this week about, people exercising in parks in different ways, but also people who haven't previously been a member. And this is all across the sector, from sort of the leisure trusts to local authority provision to the private membership side, of saying they actually now would really welcome joining and will think differently, because this has given them the kickstart to think differently. So I guess the challenge for the sector is how we bring these people in and how we do it. And we still don't have a date for opening. We've been pushing really hard on that. We were disappointed that we weren't given a July the 4th opening date, because actually one thing that's been amazing out of this is the sector's really come together to work together to produce really detailed guidance, which has been with government since May the 7th, which covers physical distancing, spacing of equipment, cleaning, sanitation, deep cleaning, numbers of people in, ventilation. I know more about ventilation now than I ever knew before. I mean, I knew that they had ventilation. I didn't realise what all the standards were before. And so the sector's really come together to say, look, we're here. So that's some really positive stuff that's come out of this time. Oh, sorry, I can't hear you.
The point about how we might do things differently, I think you're saying there may be more people who want to come and use our leisure centres, but we may also be able to be doing online classes as well. I think that's some changes that we might want to bring out.
Yeah, and I think, we're seeing that people are thinking differently about their lives. And, I live in the northeast of England, but I did spend most of my working week in London. And interestingly, just talking to lots of different colleagues about, they thought commuting was just what you did, and people into big cities spend a huge amount of time commuting. A lot of people have been talking to saying they want to rethink that themselves, that actually there is no need to necessarily spend 3 hours a day commuting, and the extra time, so there's an ability, I think, within all this to think about a lot of things in a different way. For disabled people, over the years have really struggled to get flexible working, or mums, or there's lots of people who struggle to get flexible working, but now we're able to do things in a different way. So I think there's a rethink across everything.
That's a good point. Thank you. I've got another question, and this is from one of our independent members, Councillor Frank Biederman in Devon. He says, I set up and run a run club, and it started with just a handful and have now grown to 300 members from just 6 2 years ago. And he's organised virtual advice and fun challenges through COVID to try and keep the members active. But as you said, exercise is very much about mental health benefits as well as the physical hurdle. Yeah. And so his question is about lots of members who are missing the social interaction and the fellowship. And they are wondering about, currently they only meet in groups of 6, and they'd like to be able to meet in higher numbers. If we could take groups of 20, that would mean we could get the whole group going again. And so he really feels that it's a bit strange that we can sit in a pub beer garden on a beach or down a high street and not go running in a group. So I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that. Thank you.
Yes. So this is a very personal view. I struggled to understand how pubs were safer than leisure provision, and still do. And I do see so many people taking this really seriously. I did a little while ago see a group of people who normally run together. They were running about 30 metres apart, which was, so it's not the same, but you could see that actually there was a huge benefit, because I think if you like running in groups, then part of it is you edge each other and push each other on. So I think there's been quite detailed guidance on elite sport returning, and some of that is staged, and centres opening up for elite sport. but actually how it filters down into recreational sport and activity is also really important, because you're absolutely right, that social side is a really important part of people's balance, and how we move towards that is really important. And there's, like, I have to say, well done. I mean, to get 300 people out running is really exciting, but it shows, I think, because everyone's sort of need is sort of quite different. If you have the right offer, that sounds really, but if you have the right thing that connects with them, that makes a difference. So I've got an older sister, and you wouldn't even think we're from the same family. She is not competitive. She doesn't really like physical activity, and what works for her is something completely different from what works for me. So it's important to kind of get that connection, and I think hopefully, if you try and look at things that come out of this, changing our pattern of physical activity is something we really have to prioritize. And I guess one of the challenges for us as a sector is that to get people to understand the size and scale, that it's 10 million members, actually it's 600,000 people who are employed in the sector. People might know a brand or what's in their local area. They don't understand like the collective sort of weight of that, and that's why it might get to people's top 5 of important things, but it probably never quite gets to the top 3. And actually now we have to sort of push that, and for me, NHS fit at the point of delivery is really important, and we have to reimagine the NHS as well, and how we I mentioned my speech, turn to prevention, reimagining facilities in terms of bringing leisure provision and GP surgeries and other things together. There's so many things that we have to think differently coming out of this.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Our next question is from Councillor Gillian Ford of Havering, and she's looking at, this is the question: tomorrow, a beautiful green space currently being used as a miniature golf and pitch and putt with trees of significance goes before planning to the development with 37 houses. What measures do you think we should put into place to give greater protection to public open spaces that support physical and mental health? And then so that's one question. The second question from another independent councillor's call, from Councillor Neil Pryor in Pembrokeshire. And he's asked, what do we need to do to turn the rhetoric of the prevention agenda into a reality?
Okay, thank you. There are lots of challenges around housing and having enough housing, but I think we also have to think differently about losing space. So we've been doing some work for a while, actually talking to developers about how they incorporate into a new housing development so spaces for activity, how you can walk, how you can move around in a different way. One of the Prime Minister's announcements was about sort of outdoor gyms, and you see a few of them dotted around the place, and they're okay for some, but they don't work for everybody. But I think it's about helping people feel that they can use these spaces as well, that they're a safe place to go, that that somewhere actually they know what to do. I mean, if I sort of dial it back, I think coming back to young people in terms of teaching physical literacy and basically learning how to run, jump, throw, which is the basis for everything, is teaching better skills at a younger age, so they know different things to do as they grow up, and they know how they can use these spaces in a different way. A completely different piece of work that I was involved in was about active travel, and for a school, and it turns out very, very, very few of the children walked to school because of where the school and the housing had been built, that a lot of parents didn't feel that it was safe, so the children were being dropped off. And actually, what turned out, going through the main entrance to the school, they had to walk a really long way around and across several roads, and it was quite complicated. Whereas if they opened the back gate to the school, the children walked. And okay, there might have been a bit about it was a short walk, but actually the parents felt safer in terms of the children going that way. So it's things like that that we have to think about in a more creative way. And it's a real I'm sorry, I don't know the specific area, but it's a real shame if you're losing kind of green spaces and trees areas where people might have a chance of going and being active. Councillor Cry's question about prevention. I think, so if you look at the advice that was given about 5 a day, and it seems to be sort of more accepted now, that fruit and veg, was that actually we need to eat more than 5 portions of fruit and veg a day, but 5 was the number that the government at the time thought that people could sort of get their heads around and do it. It's stepping it up from there. And if somebody is not well and goes to a GP, it is easier to write a prescription for medication. And again, GPs, not an easy job, but through their training, they get very little advice on how to socially prescribe. And this is something which is a real sort of change in discussion as part of the NHS at the moment, which is really positive. Actually, we know quite a lot of doctors and nurses are not the most physically active because of their working hours and what they do and knowing what to do. And, we know women drop out of physical activity. We used to think it was 13. We now understand it's much younger. They disengage with physical activity at a much younger age. So again, you layer on all those bits, you see why that population maybe doesn't know. And they don't have time within a GP's appointment to actually connect with the patient and say, what motivates you? What do you want to do? What do you like? And so, it's easier. And Simon Stevens, a couple of years ago at our summit, said, physical activity is a miracle cure, but it's shifting that pattern of prescribing medication to moving it towards something which is physical activity based. And also, if you're told by your GP you need to be more physically active, I think you're very motivated in the moment, but as you walk out through the door, you go, oh, well, I'll walk a bit more tomorrow, I'll do this tomorrow, and you lose that motivation. And also it comes back if you don't know what to do. A friend of mine was told by her GP she needs to walk more, but she's was born with dislocated hips, and actually walking's not easy for her. So actually telling her to walk more didn't connect with her. We've been doing quite a lot of work around social prescribing, and I'm involved with a project with the NHS which is looking at how we help educate people to think differently about social prescribing. But it's also what I talked about a little bit before about how we reimagine our facilities. So I went to an amazing facility in Sheffield, Graves, where you've got the leisure provision, and that's really, really good quality, top quality leisure provision. A lot of space. It's built in the heart of a community, but the GP surgery is there. So if the GP tells you you have to exercise more, as you leave, you are taken into the leisure provision. It's like right now, so you can't put it off. You can't, and I can't quite remember the saying, but you put off what people do put stuff off. So you're literally walked into physical activity provision, and they do some amazing work in terms of cardiac rehab, where they bring people in, and it's thinking differently about that's really important. So yes, it does involve capital spend, but we're working on financing and supporting local authorities for that. I can send anyone more details on what we've been working on in that space, but that's where some of the reimagining has to be done.
That's brilliant, thank you. I've got 4 questions which are connected, all to do with schools. So they're coming in fast now. Thank you very much for sending your questions in, folks. Firstly, Deborah Taylor has asked, she says she'd love to see schools open up their sports facilities more, but it feels that they hit a brick wall when it comes to safeguarding issues.
Yeah.
Another attendee's raised a question about whether we can work with the independent school sector more to open more facilities to communities during the school holidays at an affordable rate.
Yeah.
And Councillor Bridget Petty from North Somerset, who's also said, I'm very interested in unlocking the sports facilities within school grounds. Have you found it easier to work with academies or council-run schools? And we can imagine multiple barriers, but it sounds really great to do. And lastly, Douglas Johnson has asked about what extent does handing over school facilities to academies more against the options and benefits of opening those facilities outside school hours. So in other words, you're handing over schools to academies, so they're not under the council control, And has that had an impact on the access for the public to those facilities? Will they make them available?
Right, thank you very much for that. First question about safeguarding. So when we've opened the schools, private providers have been brought in, and that, you know, there is a cost to that, and we had some sponsorship and support to make that happen. So in terms of safeguarding, everybody who was working with young people had, you know, the highest level of safeguard, which is obviously really important. I think some of the challenges around opening schools is that you know, they have no more money in their budgets to be able to open it, and that there is a cost that comes with that. So that needs to be an additional amount of money that's found to do that. And it's also need to be really clear, it's not asking teachers to do more. So, you know, some of the criticism we had for it was like, are you asking, you know, it's like, no, we're not. It's about bringing in a different set of people. What we found is some young people quite like going back to their school, and some young people maybe want to go to a different school, so, or maybe want to be with brothers and sisters and different things like that. So it has to be quite flexible. When we did it last year, there was a cost per child of £7 a day, which included 2 snacks and lunch, and then all the physical activity. That was supported, so, you know, because a lot of families don't have that. So there were a significant number of children who you know, had that supported, which is really important, because the affordable bit is huge. You know, childcare. I've got an 18-year-old now. You know, it's just yeah, you know, there's so many families who can't afford it. So, you know, that's we've got to think about that, and it shouldn't be only for families who can. So the safeguarding bit is really important. Working with independent schools, I mean, there's been a lot of debate over the last couple of years about independent schools and charitable status, and what more they need to do to keep their charitable status. Through COVID, there's a huge number of independent schools who won't survive, and so they don't always have amazing sports facilities. I know a lot do, but there's a challenge as we go forward. I would love to see more independent schools open, and, you know, there are some who do it really well and who do really, really good community work, and some who don't. So I would like to see more of that happening, and kind of sharing facilities as well, I think is really good. Previously, there's been some really good examples where independent schools, you know, away from this, have opened up the swimming pool, or, you know, just their field. And I think that's really important. I'm afraid I can't answer the question on academy versus council run. I will find out the answer and come back to you on that. So I don't want to just kind of make up an answer in terms of that. There are different challenges with academies, and I absolutely understand why some have gone down that route in terms of opening, and actually in terms of disabled children getting into academies is a bit of a challenge. But I will come back and I will find an answer in terms of which is easiest to open. I think it's the head teacher that's a really important part of it. If you've got a head teacher who gets physical activity, then it's kind of an open door, and that is also slightly based on their own experience of physical activity. So if it's a head teacher who didn't have a great experience when they're in a PE in school, or wearing gym knickers, or the horrible stuff that, you know, lots of people remember, that has a huge influence on them. So and there's also lots of other things we can do during school, during term time. You know, there's Daily Mile, Golden Mile, there's lots of other things that we can do to make physical activity part of every day. And I think that's the other thing going forward, is that to make sure we don't lose a generation of young people, that I would love it if physical literacy had equal status with literacy and numeracy, healthy mind, body, spirit. And I think that's something else that we need to be kind of pushing for.
Good point. Thank you. I've got a few questions now. They're coming in fast now, so we'll perhaps whip through a bit more. Yep. We've got firstly two Labour and co-op councillors in Hounslow. Councillor Richard Eason asks, do you have any observations on pros and cons of councils directly managing public leisure facilities rather than contacting a third party, not-for-profit leisure facility provider? So different kinds of providers, and any thoughts on that? From Yeah, if we can just do that one first, thank you.
Okay. I absolutely understand why local authorities decided to contract out the leisure provision because of the challenges in terms of, physical activity not being a statutory service. But I think what COVID has done is highlight lots of issues in terms of that. There's a huge number of leisure centres, we're talking maybe up to 50% of leisure centres may struggle to reopen. And the challenge is between if a leisure trust is not able to keep going, because they operate on really tight margins, in terms of potentially handing back the keys, then there's not necessarily the expertise within the council. I mean, I remember the days when councils had like huge sports development departments and physical, it was amazing. But, they've just been cut and cut and cut. And if you're talking about trying to balance health and social care provision and sort of the easements of the coronavirus versus and libraries, and it's hard. So I think there are lots of pros and cons. I think it's ensuring that we do as much as we can to keep those facilities open, because 8% of facilities are in the poorest socioeconomic areas. If half of those close, we're talking about people who don't have any other options. So we're looking at it really carefully, and we're going to keep pressing government to make sure that to keep saying to them, you need to understand the seriousness of what is happening here. You won't feel the impact now, you'll feel the impact 10 years down the line.
Yeah,
so,
absolutely.
I understand the decisions that were taken, but it's not easy on those people right now.
Absolutely, thank you. We've got Councillor Karina Smart asks for our health and wellbeing and mental health. We need both physical activity and sport, but we also need to encourage people to get out into nature and connect with wildlife for their well-being. And I wonder if we can get the two strands together. If you've got any examples of planning road safety or and about how we deal with parents' worries on that. And then from Lucy Bywater, how important is planning road safety allowing children to walk to school locally? And then I've two others. You've done those.
Okay. Getting back into nature is really important. I was speaking in the agriculture bill yesterday about this very subject, about how we, as we move forward, how we pay farmers, landowners for better access. For me, there's one thing about physical access for disabled people, because it's not great. It's things like where new bike paths or bridleways are built, and then the council, again for the right reasons, put in measures to stop it being used as a rat run or misused, but then are putting in stiles or gates or big steps that means that a wheelchair user or a handbike user or someone on a scooter or a buggy can't use it. And so that's about educating and trying to balance all those different needs. So nature is really important. So watch the agriculture bill. It's up live on Parliament TV this afternoon. Sorry, I didn't mean to sound disingenuous. I was in the virtual chamber for 10 hours yesterday on it. And so there's the government are listening, and that's really important, because a lot of people don't think nature and open space is for them. And also, comes hand in hand with that, people respecting the space and learning to look after it, and whether things like spawning fish and things like that, just actually understand what's going on. So that's good. So I'm keeping pressing for access for that. Really important road safety, but it's about where things are built, but it's also about where you have crossings, drop curbs, bike paths. There's where there's kind of multiple use, things like Exhibition Road in London. That's kind of the one that I know about. It's you're balancing lots and lots of different needs in terms of whether somebody's vision impaired or a wheelchair user. The surface that you put down is really important. Drop curbs are a bit of my bugbear. You see them all over the country where they're put in brilliantly, and the other places where you might as well not bother because they're put in really badly or they're broken. Cost of fixing them is a challenge. But it's really important that we think about how everybody uses those spaces. There's a lot of talk at the moment between more cycling and cars and all that, and you're not going to get people 100% happy all the time, but thinking about how people use that. And for me, a lot of things have been working on, things like, again, more in major cities, is like the A boards that get in the way of wheelchair users, or the dockless bikes, which are more in London than anywhere else, but you know, how they just can be abandoned. And there's been lots of stories of visually impaired people who've just walked in, they didn't realise they were there. So it's getting people, if you're going to use a dockless bike, leave it somewhere safe, you know. So bit more education. But yeah, the road planning is really important to think about how everybody uses it.
Yes, thank you very much. That leads quite well on to Councillor Debbie Andre from the Isle of Wight has asked if you've got examples of how to regenerate the high streets that, in a way that promotes health and well-being. And I'll just mention, but I think you've already answered David Hitchener's question from Herefordshire about wanting equality of importance for sports and arts with maths and English, and I think you did raise that one already. But about the high streets, and then I've got two more on the green agenda. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. It's a bit of a soundbite, but it's easier to open a chicken shop on the high street than it is to open leisure provision. And that's very, so we spent time with ministers talking about planning and change of use, and it's sort of interesting. So some of the pushback we've had is, well, we don't want a gym on the high street. And like, generally people who use gyms as leisure provision, I've never seen sort of antisocial behaviour. You know, it's, you know, if they're on the high street, there's options of secondary spend, of actually just being in the local community, not going to maybe out of town. Or so I think every local authority, you know, might have different rules on planning as well. So I think it's thinking about the leisure sector as something. I think sometimes we think about leisure provision as a big, maybe council-run leisure centre, you know, not something that is a yoga studio or is a small, you know, gym, or, you know, just there's lots of different types of activity that you can do. So I think it's just not forgetting that the sector, you know, can fit into a small shop, you know, and do things like that, and not making it harder. So sorry to the guys who work in planning, but, you know, just, you know, have a think about what we can offer, because there are definitely huge benefits. You know, high streets are lit, there's parking, you know, there's lots of things that would help bring people in. So it's quite important about that.
Thank you, that's great. Turning to the green agenda, I wonder if I can ask, how does the leisure sector help us to continue mainstreaming the green benefits that we see coming forward? I wonder if you can help with that. Think about the green benefit.
To be honest, I'm not sure I quite understand the question.
Okay. Let me do two together. I think we are seeing some green benefits together at the moment. We are seeing more people out and about, and I think that's helping. And from Councillor Sam Casey Rehay, he said, I've always thought the biggest barrier to children playing outside is the traffic changes, but how can we link this to reducing people's reliance on cars for very short journeys, which would benefit everyone, except perhaps the car companies?
Thank you. So that's really, thank you. It gave me a bit more time to think about the answer. So I think if you look at leisure providers over the years, they've become much more conscious of things like water bottles, what food they sell, you know, much more than just getting people in and flogging them stuff, if that's a bit too harsh. So I think a lot of providers think about the impact they have, you know, a lot of sort of the new provision in terms of how they're built and being built to the highest standards. I think some of the challenge we've got is, you know, a lot of local leisure provision is past its sell by date, you know, past renewal or rebuild. So, you know, there may be some facilities who, you know, they're not operating at the level that you would like them to. I mean, if you look at swimming pools, in terms of, you know, generally swimming pools lose money, and it's all the other things that bring it in. But, you know, millions of people use swimming as an activity, and they're being particularly hit hard at the time. But there's not loads of new money to rebuild swimming pools to make them, you know, the highest level of sort of green standards that you kind of help. So that's a bit of a challenge. But I think where the leisure sector is really good, if in terms of it does get people thinking differently about how they behave and what they do. And, you know, I know one place that I go to doesn't sell water bottles anymore, and it's got a fountain and you bring your bottle. So it has an impact on behaviour, sometimes without it being right in your face in terms of what they do. I'd hope that, you know, through being physically active, it's what more can we do to get people to think about green spaces and to think, and actually that comes through education, through other bits. I think we've got a generation of young people who are more aware of green issues and more aware of global warming and things like that. Not without kind of adding to what school, but it's how you can learn more about how you can use those spaces in a different way that's really important. The question on closed streets, yeah, I mean, I showed my daughter a picture of the house that I grew up in, and there was like one car parked on the street, and she was like, well, was everyone at work? I'm like, no, there was only one family who had a car when growing up. And now you look at it, and you know, I'm the last person to talk about people having cars and stuff, because I've got one, my husband's got one. But there's definitely a thing about how children are allowed to play out, and there's quite a few different organisations that are doing some amazing work where they close the streets at certain times of day and they're blocked off, and so it allows the children to play on the streets and get to know their neighbours and do things like that. And there's been some really good local support for that. And okay, a few people a bit grumpy, but actually once they learn why the streets are being closed, and you know, if you want to park, you need to be in before 4 or come after 6. It has sort of transformed. So that kind of access to play, I think, is really important. But you know, that relies on local people, you know, lots of time, you know, just again, you know, having the capacity to be able to do that. And right now, a lot of people are pressed. So I mean, anything that can be done to encourage people to think about how they close the streets or parking is really important. I mean, I hate it when you see no ball games. But then saying that, if someone was kicking a ball against the side of my house, I'd be quite annoyed. Mm-hmm. But it's that, you know, be quiet, don't do anything, don't play games. Actually, we need to kind of be able to hear children laughing and playing. You know,
yeah.
But you know, just yeah.
Excellent. I think we're turning now to the last 3 questions. Councillor Peter Byett, who's a Labour councillor from East Suffolk, he makes a point more for councils, I think, but it also raises an important point. In East Suffolk, they have set up 8 community partnership boards across the district, and the board for his area decided that tackling childhood obesity was the first project and would include a series of walks in local parks. And the county council also separately offering the same events. How can this sort of duplication be avoided? And there seems to be some disconnect between the overseeing local health authorities and the councils at all levels. And then from Councillor Frost says that 27% of adults in Stockton had not visited a park before COVID. Yeah. And this has improved slightly, but investment in the big key is a big key for them. Mm-hmm. And how can we do this when we're short of funding from central government? And then to finish, the last question, what would you like to see in the Chancellor's economic statement later on? Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you. So I'm just scribbling notes. The partnership stuff's really important, and you just see it all over the place. I had a friend of mine who's not British, and she was applying for a job in sport, and I went, oh right, okay, a minute. So I kind of filled in about 8 bits of paper and said, right, this is how it works. And she's like, right, that's UK. And went, no, that's England. Right, this is Wales. This is Scotland. I went, oh no, the UK. And so there is. I mean, it's just it's not always easy to find sort of the small groups, the people who you know, who maybe are below the radar, who don't make lots of noise, who don't ask for lots of funding. It's hard to find those groups, but I think anything you could do to connect and link those people in is really important, because it doesn't help anyone when there's layers and layers of different stuff. And sometimes people who are doing really good jobs running small projects that's all they've got time to see. So I think, sorry, I don't have an answer to it, apart from we've got to try and stop that happening, because it's amazing when you kind of link. I'm part of a foundation where we support sports projects and physical activity all around the world. The best thing we ever did was linking up all the different projects to each other, because it might be a project from Rwanda and New York, but they've got loads of stuff in common and loads of things where they've gone through it and learned, and that's where we've had huge successes, is connecting those different people together. Yes, parks and Stockton. So I live in Stockton, and I'll be really honest, I've got a park just up the road. How long have I lived here? 12 years before COVID. Probably been there about 5 times, maybe. Yeah, because it was just, that sort of didn't fit in with the physical activity that I did, and it's a lovely park. I just didn't go, and now I'm kind of there quite a lot. So it's, again, I'm not sure I particularly have an answer to it in terms of how you open them up, but I think actually having the statistics is really important. And I don't know whether you Stockton had the stats before, or and measured it between now and then, but actually, unless you have those stats, you don't know how to change it. And I sit on the board of Olympic Park in London, because I was part of the bid from the beginning, and all the way through. And they keep a lot of stats about who uses the park, where they're from, age group, the intersectionality of it all. Because how do you know the right thing to offer unless you know who's actually coming in and out all the time? So some of their work is really interesting, and what you offer is quite important. Even things like, what time the cafe's open and what it serves and how expensive it is, that's, that makes a difference to how people think they can use the space. What would I like to see in the Chancellor's economic statement? Oh, well, just generally more support for local authorities would be quite, because that's a bit of a vague one, but I think it's understanding the pressure that local authorities are under, and they can't, there is no magic money tree, we all know that, but understanding the decisions that councillors are taking day in, day out, week in, week out, in terms of trying to balance things. There's a real hole in budgets, and if you just look at just the leisure provision, how much is needed? 1 billion, probably. It's if that was in my bank account, that's a huge amount of money, but actually in terms of government spend, it's not. Actually a real serious commitment to understanding how all these services join up, because if you're trying to make a decision between leisure provision and libraries, sorry, I just muttered in the book, but it's understanding that all those things are important and they all interact with each other, and it's about making sure that everyone can access those things. So yeah, I'm not holding I'm not expecting to see 1 billion, but actually an understanding of what the sector is going through would be really nice right now. And if there is 1 billion, I will apologise, but it's that's what I'd like to see, just an understanding the physical health benefits, but also the economic benefits of actually saving the sector.
Absolutely, that's really helpful, thank you. And I think that's a really strong voice for local government for us as our Vice President, so thank you very much indeed. On that note, I'm afraid it's time. Thank you very much to everybody for your questions. They've been really insightful and thoughtful, and with lots of good examples as well that's going on in council, and actually run by councillors as well as council. So thank you very much indeed for that. Brilliant. I want particularly to thank Tanni for joining us today. It's been really interesting, and I've just been bowled over by the breadth and of your understanding and knowledge right across local government. Actually, from planning to not just to sport, from all of those things. So much appreciated indeed. And thank everybody for joining us. I hope you find it useful, and look forward to seeing you tomorrow for the last of our annual conference virtual sessions. And this afternoon, you can either watch Tanni doing the speech, or you can watch, we've actually got an LGA training session as well this afternoon with the Innovation Board. So thank you once again to our sponsors, the CCLA. And finally, there will be a short survey for all those who took part, because I hope you'll complete it. because we really value your feedback. Hope you found today interesting and useful. And thank you very much, Tanni, and thank you.